The second type of reproduction commonly seen in higher organisms, higher plants and most of the animals is sexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, there is usually formation of two different types of gametes, that is a male gamete and a female gamete, which is then followed by fusion of the gametes, that is fertilization takes place, which is a very important event which distinguishes sexual reproduction from asexual reproduction. Due to the fusion of two different type of gametes from two parents in sexual reproduction, the offsprings, these are not identical. Offsprings are not identical. Whereas in asexual reproduction, we saw that the offsprings are morphologically and genetically similar to the parent. So these carry more variations. Now the mode of sexual reproduction in different groups of organisms will have their own specifications and differences. In spite of that, all organisms that undergo sexual reproduction, they have a general scheme of events. All sexually reproducing organisms, they exhibit three phases in their life cycle, that is the juvenile phase, reproductive phase and senescent phase, or we can say as senescence. So all sexually reproducing organisms, they go through these three phases in their life cycle or in their life span. Juvenile phase is the period of growth during which the organism, it grows in size. In plants, we can call juvenile phase as vegetative phase, where the plant increases in length, that is the stem grows and the leaves will increase in number. So it is a period of growth. Once an organism has attained a particular size or height, it is then capable of reproduction. It is said to have entered the reproductive phase. Now, the reproductive phase is of variable durations in different groups of organisms. So, in plants, when can you say that it is in the reproductive phase? Very simple. When a plant, it starts to flower, we can say that it has completed the vegetative phase and it is now in the reproductive phase, because flower is the reproductive part of a plant. When a plant starts to flower, it means that it is in the reproductive phase. Now, different plants have different durations of reproductive phase. For example, we can classify the plants into three general types: biennial annual plants, biennial plants and perennial plants. These are plants that complete their life cycle in 1 year. That is, they grow, they produce the flower, fruit and they die. So their entire life cycle is for 1 year. Therefore, of course, they will show flowering very early as compared to a biennial plant whose life cycle it completes in 2 years. So it requires 2 years for completing the entire life cycle. Whereas in perennial plants, which grow for 10, 20, 30, 100, 200 years, so they keep on. For example, banyan tree. So it is difficult to track the flowering stage. For example, a plant like bamboo, it only flowers once in its lifetime. So in its entire lifetime, it will flower only once, and once flowering is done, the plant will die. So it flowers once in 15 to 20 years, depending on the life cycle of the bamboo. There is another plant called as Strobilanthus kuntiana. These are plants that produce blue colored flowers present in the hills of Kerala, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Strobilanthus kuntiana, that is the scientific name. Commonly these are called as Neela Kuranji. The word Neela refers to blue. So these flower once in 12 years. So every 12 years, these plants will produce the flower, and the entire hills look blue in color. Therefore, the hills get their name Nilgiri Hills based on this plant. So we saw that the reproductive phase will be of different durations in different groups of plants. Bamboo flowers only once, whereas Strobilanthus kuntiana flowers once in 12 years. If you take the case of animals also, they display variety of reproductive phases and durations. In general, in animals, we find that there are two types of reproductive cycles. That is, one group of animals, they exhibit what is called as a oestrous cycle. The second group of animals, they exhibit a menstrual cycle. That is, animals, higher animals, for example, reptiles, amphibians, birds, mammals. So some groups of birds, they lay eggs, reptiles lay eggs, fishes, amphibians also lay eggs. Whereas in the case of mammals, when the mammals have entered the reproductive phase, they undergo certain cyclical changes in the ovary as well as in their accessory ducts. So based on the type of cyclical changes, we can classify the mammals into having oestrous cycle and ones that have menstrual cycle. So animals that undergo oestrous cycle are the non-primates. So non-primates, for example, deer, cow, dog, etc. Whereas menstrual cycle is seen in the primates, that is monkeys, chimpanzees and human beings. So these are the primates. Menstrual cycle is seen in the primate, whereas oestrous cycle is shown by the non-primates. The important difference between these two cycles is that in oestrous cycle, every month there is no bleeding when there are changes occurring in the ovary as well as in the accessory ducts. There is no bleeding, whereas in menstrual cycle there is a distinct bleeding that is shown due to the cyclical changes taking place in ovary and the accessory ducts. And these animals showing oestrous cycle, they exhibit a heat period during the oestrous cycle. Heat period, it refers to a small short duration during which these animals are sexually active. Whereas in animals that show menstrual cycle, there is no such heat period. They remain sexually active throughout their reproductive phase. So there is no such heat period that is seen during the reproductive cycle. Now, based on this, whether the animals are sexually active during a particular duration, during a particular time in the reproductive cycle, or whether they are sexually active throughout their reproductive phase, animals can further be classified as seasonal breeders and continuous breeders. Sexually active during a particular season. For example, frogs. They lay their eggs during rainy season. So they are active during a particular season. So these are seasonal breeders. Whereas human beings are an example for continuous breeders. They are sexually active throughout the reproductive cycle. Now, whatever be the differences in these two, all sexually reproducing organisms, be it the plants or be it the animals, they exhibit a sequence of events during sexual reproduction. So once the reproductive cycle has ended, the organisms will then enter the senescent phase, which is also the old age during which plants lose their leaves, they become weak, whereas animals also show reduction in metabolism. Metabolism will become slow, and this is characterized by the loss of reproduction. During senescent phase, organisms cannot reproduce. So that is about the 3 stages in the life cycle of sexually reproducing organisms. Sexual reproduction itself can be studied under 3 heads, that is pre-fertilization, fertilization and post-fertilization. So under these 3 headings we can study sexual reproduction in different organisms. So let us study them one by one.